In honor of fall, I'm going to be caking a giant apple made out of cake. Fuck, what am I saying? Hi, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Jake, and I'm starting a new series today that is going to be called Caked Up with Jake, where we make crazy cakes each week. Some will be sculpted like the apple that I'm making in this week's video. Others will just be traditional cakes. I don't know. Whatever you guys want to see, let me know down below. Comment anything that you can think of throughout the video, and I will get to work on caking it. But I'm super excited, and this is a series that I've been working on and trying to start for a while and figure out how I want to do it. Obviously, it is going to change a lot over the course of making these videos, but this is the very first one. If you've been following me for a while, you may have seen this giant pumpkin that I made last year. The link is up here, or up here. I don't know which side it's on. The link is up in the clouds. I figured I can't make a pumpkin again. Pumpkins are overdone in the fall. Let's give apples some representation. They don't get any representation in the fall, I don't think, and I love an apple. I love a Honey Crisp too, and that's what I modeled this cake after. A Honey Crisp. Have you ever had a Krispy Kreme? Right. Was it crispy? Right. Right.
Have you ever had a Krispy Kreme? Have you ever gone to Krispy Kreme? Was it crispy?
No.
Yeah, right.
It's time I stop talking and let's make the cake. To start this cake, I just baked off a double batch of vanilla cake. Whenever I'm sculpting with a cake, I actually use a cake recipe from Yolanda Gamp. She has a show called How to Cake It on YouTube. She creates these crazy cake videos. She actually created an apple cake, which is what I watched to get inspired and to figure out how I was going to make this cake. So shout out to her for that. I feel like a prodigy of hers. I feel like she taught me almost everything I know, even though I've never met or spoken to her in my life. I just grew up watching her videos, so this kind of feels like full circle now that I'm making the cakes that she made in those videos. I went down memory lane, but I use her vanilla cake recipe because it's very sturdy and it has a great structure for carving cake. I really wanted to do an apple filling in this cake, but whenever you're sculpting a cake, especially one that is the shape of something like an apple where it's so narrow at the bottom, you have to be careful because fillings make cakes slide around and hold their shape a little less easily, and I knew that that was going to be the case with this cake. That is why I just went with a traditional vanilla cake. I do have my own vanilla cake recipe that I use for birthday cakes and other stuff, but whenever I'm carving a cake, I do use her recipe, and it's linked down below to her website. She also has a cake book, I believe, and a bunch of other stuff. I just separated the batter into 2 8-inch round cake pans and then 3 6-inch round cake pans, all greased and lined with parchment paper. The 6-inch cake rounds are going to be all used for this cake, and then the 8-inch cake rounds are going to be used for another cake. So I ended up just wrapping those and freezing them, and I'll take those out of the freezer and use them whenever it's time for that cake. Don't mind the construction that these motherfuckers have going on all the time. Oh wait. Like, girl, what are we knocking? Who's knocking? The one thing that's difficult about baking cakes in this kitchen that I have not mastered is my oven. My oven does not bake consistently. Also, the dial on it does not have exact temperature, so I just go like, I move the knob and hope it's like at 375 or 325. I never really know. I should put a thermometer in there. All that is to say, I baked my cakes until a toothpick in the center came out clean. The tops of these cakes browned a little more than I would like, but that's just the way my oven has been baking them. When the cakes were done baking, I let them cool for about 10 minutes in the pan, and then I flipped them onto some plastic wrap and wrapped them up. That just holds in the moisture, especially whenever they're still a little warm, and I let them sit on my counter for about a day until it was time to decorate them. You can also freeze them. That's what I did with the 8-inch cake rounds, is I'm not using them for a while, so I ended up throwing them in my freezer, and then I'll pull them out whenever it's time to decorate that other cake, and they'll still be fresh, they just have to thaw. Then the next day it was time to decorate, which I was so excited about. This is gonna be really weird and niche, but has anybody seen the show Monk, where he like touches poles? Something like that. I think I have it, but I don't want to get tested for it because I don't want to know. I don't want to be medicated. I love the way I am. But whenever I was watching cake videos as a kid and they would peel off the parchment paper on the back of the cake before decorating, that was my favorite thing ever to watch. It like scratches a part of my brain that I don't even know how to describe. The first thing I had to do was level each of the cakes, so I just set them on my turntable and I went with a serrated bread knife, and around the cake I kind of score where I want the line to be. I don't measure, I don't use a ruler, I don't use a cake leveler. It's never really exact. I just kind of have gotten a feel for it over time and am able to get it pretty level usually. Once I go around the entire cake, then I start cutting in. Once those were leveled, it was time to stack and fill them. I'm just using a regular American buttercream. I post all my recipes on my Substack. It's a great medium for me to get some writing practice in. I love to write as well as share some other recipes that I create with you guys. But my American buttercream is a very simple recipe, so I'll go ahead and throw that up there for you. I just put a dollop of that in the center, and then I smooth it out with a small offset spatula. You don't want to put too much filling in the middle of these cakes because they will slide, which we don't want whenever we're carving. So I just do a thin layer. Once those were stacked, I went ahead and took a big bubble tea straw and I put it in the middle of the cake. This is just going to give me support. Once again, because the cake is going to become so narrow at the bottom, it's going to help it keep its shape and not slide one way or the other. Put the straw in the cake. I just put it right down the center, and then I take scissors and kind of mark where the top of the cake is. And because this cake was going to be indented in the top, I actually cut a little below that line so that I had room to carve out that center of the apple. What are we going to call that? The belly button of the apple. I had to make sure there was room for that, and I didn't want a straw sticking up, so I cut the straw a little below the top of the cake, and it was time to start carving. The first thing I wanted to tackle when carving this cake was that rounded edge on the top and the belly button of the apple. So I went around a little bit and just cut the corner of the cake off, and then in the center I just went in with a small paring knife and did the same thing. Some people are very aggressive in the way they carve cakes. I do it very slowly because I'm scared if I cut off too much I will ruin the entire cake. So I just go in with a little knife, and over time I just slowly peel away cake and cake and cake until I get the shape I want. This cake took me about 50 minutes to carve because it is such a finicky shape. Some are very round and then some are more narrow, and I was going for the more narrow look. That being said, the nice thing about a shape like an apple is that it's not perfect, and apples all look different and have little indents here and there, or one side sticks out a little more than the other. After I got my cake the shape I wanted it was time to crumb coat it. A crumb coat, if you don't know, is just a thin layer of buttercream around the cake to lock in the crumbs. Many people think that whenever you're working with a cake with fondant, you only have to do one layer of buttercream. I strongly advise doing two. The reason is that if you have crumbs poking through the frosting and then you cover it in fondant, you're gonna be able to see it through the fondant. Fondant is very malleable, I think is the word, so it shapes to whatever's underneath it. So if you do have an extra bit of frosting at one point or crumbs here, it's going to show that shape or that indent on the outside of the cake. So it's very important that you get a nice smooth layer of buttercream underneath the fondant. The shape of this cake was a little tricky just because of the way it's rounded at the top. Anyway, I finished my crumb coat, popped that in the fridge, and then I was working on this little gum paste flower in my stem. For the flower, I just took a little bit of green gum paste and I put it in an impression mold, and then I popped it out. I like to use cornstarch when working with gum paste or fondant. I just find it works better. The other thing about fondant is it's made with powdered sugar, so whenever you add more powdered sugar, it gets absorbed quicker than if you use cornstarch. For the stem of the apple, I just took some more of that green gum paste, rolled it really thin, and then stuck a floral wire through the bottom of it, and then I let that dry as well. The one thing that I noticed about the stem on my apple, where is it? At the top of the stem, it indents a little bit, so I took this little pointy tool, I don't even know the exact name for it, and I put a little indent on the top of the stem just so that it has that added texture that stem on an apple has. When those were set aside to dry, it was time to final coat my cake. So I pulled my cake out of the fridge, and then I took some more of that vanilla buttercream and I added just a slightly thicker layer of buttercream all around the entirety of the cake. I mainly used an offset spatula, a small offset spatula, and I think a small offset spatula is my favorite thing on earth. I love it. I don't like using a big offset spatula. They scare me. I don't like using a straight edge spatula. That scares me as well. I love a small offset. It's like the perfect handheld bite size, not a bite size, party fun size. That's what I am. I love the shape of an offset spatula. So I went around, added some more of that buttercream to the cake, and then I actually popped my cake back into the fridge to chill for about 15 minutes while I rolled out my red fondant. Rolling out fondant, it's very important that you move it frequently, otherwise it will get stuck. I do have a big fondant mat, but I was just using this little soap pat because I was being lazy. I was constantly moving the fondant around just to make sure that it wasn't getting stuck, because the worst thing is whenever you roll out a big sheet of fondant and then you realize the center of it is stuck to the surface that you're rolling it on and you have to start all over. When my fondant was all rolled out, it was time to pull my cake out of the fridge and get it nice and smooth. To do this, I used a paper towel and then just my fingertip. Our hands carry heat, so whenever the heat of your hand touches that buttercream, it is butter after all. It melts it slightly or softens it. When covering a cake with fondant, typically first order of business is getting the edge nice and smooth, because if not, it will pull down and that's where you'll see most of the cracking. So I wanted to cover that first and get that out of the way. This cake was difficult to cover because once you get to the bottom, it's so narrow that it actually pleats over itself and the fondant sticks together and it gets all bundled. So I had to keep moving and I kind of pull apart and then smooth, pull apart and smooth, and it's not going to be perfect. There was definitely a back of this cake that had more pleats than the other. It's just natural when covering a cake that's shaped like this that it's going to happen. There's really no way around it no matter how hard you try. And you also have to work quickly with fondant because it does tear. Once I got it looking the best I could, I trimmed the excess fondant and then it was time to cover those seams with a fondant paste. The fondant paste is another trick I learned from How to Cake It, and it's just fondant and clear food grade alcohol, and you just mix it together until it forms kind of like a paste, like a buttercream almost. And then I just smooth that over the creases, and once it dries, it'll dry smooth in the same color as the rest of the cake, so you won't even know that there were pleats underneath it. After I finished going around the cake with that fondant paste and getting it as smooth as possible, I made the dumbest decision I've ever made when making a cake, and I decided, hey, why not transfer the cake to a smaller board so that it looks more uniform? Well, I moved the cake and the fondant started to pool, so I only got it about 3/4 of the way onto the new board. So that is why it is now uneven on the final cake board. One thing that I love and I think makes any cake look 10 times better than it does without is a shine on a cake. This shine, I wanted to have some color, so I painted it with some red food coloring and that alcohol again. Apples are kind of shiny. And then if you look at an apple, this is mine here, but it has all these little yellow splotches. I think it's yellow. It's like a very light yellow and green and whatever. They're very discolored. So what I did was I have this gold petal dust and I went in with that and some alcohol and I brushed from the center. I started at the belly button of the cake because it kind of comes outward, and then I started going around the sides and just doing little streaks here and there. But I didn't like how yellow it was. It was too golden. So I had the idea to go over it once again with that red, which was still a little opaque. And once I brushed over the yellow with the red, it muted it a little bit, but gave it kind of a more natural streak look, which I love. And I was like, this is it. This is perfect. We're golden, girl. So I went through the entirety of the cake, then the rest of it, and added more yellow streaks and then covered it with the red. And I think it came out really, really pretty. All we had to do left was add the stem and the leaf. So I painted those with just some cocoa powder. Looking at the stem of an apple, there's not much brown on it and there's a lot of green showing actually. So I'm kind of happy that it didn't look perfect and it looked green. It looked more realistic this way, I think. But I wasn't 100% sold on how the stem looked, but it looked fine nonetheless. And then I just used some cocoa powder as well on the leaf and dusted it slightly just to give it a little bit of a dirty look. Not that anybody wants a dirty apple, but I feel like the leaves on the apple are never perfectly green, if there ever even is a leaf on an apple. I don't know. But that is our apple cake, you guys. I had so much fun caking this and I am very, very pleased with how it turned out. If there is anything else that you want to see me cake or any other ideas or concepts that you have for video style or next thing to make or anything else to bake even, let me know. Drop a comment down below and also drop a like and hit that subscribe button and press the notification bell to always stay tuned whenever I drop a new video. With the holidays coming up, I think it's going to be a really exciting time for all of us. But thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it and I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it, and I will see you next week for another cake.